The wedding of Rhea Kapoor and Arjun Malhotra was the most talked about event of the year. News channels, magazines, and social media were flooded with pictures of the grand ceremony. It took place in one of Mumbai's most luxurious hotels, filled with crystal chandeliers, silk drapes, and flowers imported from Europe. Politicians, celebrities, and business tycoons attended, each one dressed in their finest, eager to witness the union between two of India's most admired families. Arjun was a billionaire businessman known for his chain of luxury hotels across Asia. His reputation was one of power, ambition, and charm. He had everything people could dream of: money, influence, and looks that drew constant media attention. Rhea Kapoor, on the other hand, was admired for her quiet grace. She came from a respected family in Delhi, not as wealthy as Arjun's but well regarded in social circles. She was educated, elegant, and kind, the perfect image of what society imagined a good wife should be. The love story between them seemed perfect from the outside. Arjun and Rhea had met through mutual friends at a charity gala, and within months, their relationship had become the subject of gossip columns and wedding rumors. When Arjun proposed in front of hundreds of guests at a luxury resort in Goa, the video went viral across the country. It was the kind of romance that people wanted to believe in: beautiful, effortless, and larger than life. But behind Rhea's calm smile was a truth that could destroy everything. For years, Rhea had been living with a secret she never intended to have. During her college years, she had received a blood transfusion after a car accident. Months later, a medical test revealed she had contracted HIV. Her world fell apart that day, and for a long time she withdrew from everything and everyone. But with treatment and support from a private doctor, she regained control of her life. She kept her condition private, fearing how people would treat her if they knew. Even her closest friends never learned the truth. When she met Arjun, she was already managing her illness carefully and looked completely healthy. She told herself she would reveal her condition before marriage, but as the relationship grew, the fear of losing him became unbearable. As the wedding approached, she convinced herself that love could overcome the truth, that modern medicine had made it manageable, and that no one needed to know. It was a decision made from fear, not deceit. She dreamed of a fresh start, believing she could keep her past separate from her new life. The wedding was everything she had imagined: fireworks lighting the night sky, guests dancing until dawn, photographers capturing every smile. Yet deep inside, Rhea felt a quiet unease that she couldn't explain. When the celebrations ended and the guests finally left, she looked at Arjun standing proud beside her, unaware of the storm that was destined to destroy both of their lives. The celebration had finally ended, and the Malhotra mansion was quiet again. The air was heavy with the smell of roses and incense, remnants of the grand wedding that had taken place just hours before. Rhea walked through the hallway lined with expensive paintings and marble pillars, still wearing the heavy bridal jewelry that now felt like chains. Everything around her screamed luxury: the gold-patterned curtains, the crystal lamps, the silence that came with too much wealth. Yet inside her there was only fear. She had entered her husband's house, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a museum where every move she made could be judged. Arjun had barely spoken since they returned from the hotel where the reception had taken place. He seemed distracted, distant, almost irritated by small things. The way the servants moved too slowly, the noise from the kitchen, the calls he kept receiving from his friends congratulating him. Rhea tried to convince herself it was just exhaustion. Weddings were overwhelming after all. But deep down, she sensed a growing distance between them, an invisible wall that had risen without warning. As the night grew quieter, Rhea sat in front of the mirror in their enormous bedroom. The reflection staring back at her didn't look like a bride anymore. She looked frightened, like someone who had stepped into a life she didn't belong to. She knew she couldn't delay the truth forever. The secret she had carried for years was now sitting like a weight on her chest. She had promised herself she would tell Arjun on their wedding night, that he deserved to know everything before their new life began. She even rehearsed the words in her head, imagining a calm conversation, his shock turning into understanding, his love staying the same. But every time she tried to speak, her courage dissolved into silence. While she gathered her thoughts, Arjun entered the room, unbuttoning his jacket and removing his watch. He didn't look at her. He just moved mechanically, pouring himself a drink and sitting on the couch. Rhea hesitated, wanting to speak but unable to find the right moment. The silence between them grew colder. She turned away, pretending to organize her suitcase, hoping for another chance later. As she unpacked, a small white envelope slipped from her jewelry pouch and slid across the polished floor. It was the confidential medical file from her clinic in Delhi, the one she had carried for emergencies and never meant for anyone to see. She didn't notice it fall. Arjun, searching for his cufflinks near the dresser a few minutes later, noticed the envelope tucked under the corner of the carpet. Curious, he picked it up, thinking it might be part of the wedding papers. When he saw the hospital's letterhead and the words HIV management, his face stiffened. For a few moments, he simply stared at it, as though he couldn't believe what he was reading. Then his breathing changed, sharp, uneven. The report slipped from his hands, landing silently on the carpet. He stood there frozen, his mind racing between disbelief and anger. In that instant, every image of their wedding, every vow, every promise, shattered in his mind. Without saying a word, he walked out of the room, leaving Rhea alone, unaware of what had just been discovered and how her secret had already begun to destroy her world. The next morning began with an uneasy quiet. The Malhotra mansion, usually filled with the sounds of servants moving briskly through corridors, was strangely still. Rhea woke up to find the other side of the bed empty. The sunlight streamed through the long curtains, illuminating the wedding garland still hanging near the doorway. For a few seconds, she allowed herself to believe that everything was normal. But when she noticed her jewelry scattered on the dressing table and her wedding veil crumpled on the floor, she sensed something was wrong. Downstairs, Arjun was sitting in the private lounge with his family. His mother, Kamini Malhotra, had always been a woman of strict pride, obsessed with reputation and image. Arjun placed the medical report on the table in front of her without saying a word. She picked it up, her expression turning from curiosity to disgust within seconds. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Kamini's voice trembled with anger as she whispered that the family name could not be dragged into scandal. Arjun's father, though quieter, was equally furious. They felt betrayed, humiliated, and deceived. To them, Rhea was no longer a new bride. She was a problem that needed to be erased. By noon, the gossip had already spread among the household staff. Servants exchanged nervous glances, whispering behind closed doors. They spoke in low tones about the envelope that had been found and the furious conversation that followed. Rhea could hear faint murmurs outside her room, but no one dared approach her. The warmth she had felt during the wedding was gone. The house that had once glowed with celebration now pulsed with tension and anger. She spent the afternoon sitting near the window, staring at the garden below, trying to gather her thoughts. She thought about confessing everything to Arjun, explaining that she had never meant to deceive him, that her illness was under control and posed no danger. But fear kept her frozen. What if he threw her out? What if the media found out? Her entire life would crumble in a single headline. She imagined the judgmental eyes of society, the endless whispers about her character. Every possibility ended in ruin. As evening approached, Arjun's younger brother Vikram arrived with a few relatives. Their faces were grim, and their conversation, though hushed, carried through the hallways. They discussed how to handle the situation, whether to involve the police or pay Rhea's family to take her back quietly. Arjun said little, but his silence was more frightening than anger. He sat motionless, his eyes hollow, his jaw clenched. When Kamini spoke of removing her from the house before morning, he didn't object. Later that night, the servants were told not to let anyone leave the property and to stay away from the east wing where the couple's bedroom was located. The lights in that section of the mansion were dimmed early. Rhea, locked inside her room, could hear faint footsteps outside, moving closer and then stopping. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor made her heart race. She pressed herself against the door, terrified, realizing too late that her secret had turned her wedding night into a death sentence. The following morning, the Malhotra mansion was surrounded by police cars and reporters. The once silent luxury home had turned into a crime scene. Servants stood outside, trembling as they whispered among themselves. Inside, the grand bedroom that had been decorated for newlyweds was now cordoned off with yellow tape. Rhea's body lay on the marble floor beside the bed, her skin pale and marked by bruises. The gold bangles she had worn during the wedding were scattered across the carpet, and her veil was torn, stained with drops of blood. The scent of roses that once filled the room was replaced by the metallic smell of tragedy. The family doctor arrived first, escorted by Arjun's mother, Kamini. Her voice was cold and sharp, insisting that Rhea had fallen in the bathroom during the night. The doctor hesitated, glancing at the bruises on Rhea's arms, but he knew better than to challenge the Malhotras. Within minutes, he signed the death certificate, stating the cause as accidental trauma. The family's plan was simple: silence the staff, cremate the body quickly, and avoid any police involvement. Their reputation meant everything, and nothing could be allowed to tarnish the family name. But things didn't go as smoothly as they expected. One of the younger maids, frightened by what she had seen, secretly took photos on her phone before Rhea's body was removed. She sent the images to a friend who worked for a small online news outlet. By the afternoon, those photos, the bruises, the bloodstains, and the broken bangles, were already circulating online. Social media exploded with outrage. The headlines were brutal: "Billionaire bride found dead on wedding night," and "Was it murder or suicide?" Under public pressure, the police were forced to intervene. Officers arrived in the evening, though their behavior made it clear they were reluctant to challenge such a powerful family. Arjun greeted them calmly, dressed in a tailored suit, pretending to be devastated but composed. He repeated his story, that Rhea had slipped, that they had found her unconscious, and that help had come too late. Kamini supported his version, crying on cue for the cameras waiting outside the gate. However, the post-mortem report changed everything. The medical examiner quietly confirmed that Rhea's injuries were not consistent with a fall. There were multiple blunt force wounds, including to her ribs and head. Defensive marks on her hands suggested she had tried to protect herself. The truth was clear. Rhea had been beaten before she died. The news spread like wildfire, and public anger grew. Protesters gathered outside the Malhotra mansion demanding justice. Rhea's family arrived from Delhi, devastated and desperate for answers, but they were met with silence and lawyers. Arjun was taken into custody for questioning, though many doubted he would ever face real consequences. As the flashing lights of police cameras reflected off the mansion's gates, a chilling image formed in people's minds: a young bride, full of hope, dying on the very night her new life was meant to begin. Behind the walls of wealth and power, a dark truth had been hidden for too long, and now the world was finally starting to see it. Months passed, and the case that had once dominated every news channel slowly began to fade from the headlines. Yet for Rhea's family, time had stopped. Her parents, unable to accept the official story of an accident, fought endlessly to keep the investigation alive. They spent their savings on lawyers, spoke to journalists, and appeared on talk shows pleading for justice. But each time they seemed close to progress, a new obstacle appeared. Witnesses withdrew statements, documents vanished, and police officers were quietly transferred. The Malhotra family's influence ran deep, and their power could bend truth itself. The trial began nearly a year later in a crowded Mumbai courtroom. Arjun arrived each day dressed impeccably, surrounded by his legal team and bodyguards. He appeared calm, even confident, while Rhea's parents sat silently in the back row, holding each other's hands. The prosecution presented the post-mortem findings, the bruises, the photographs, and the maid's testimony. The maid, her voice trembling, described hearing screams from the couple's room that night and seeing Arjun leave with blood on his hands. The room fell silent as she spoke, but her fear was visible. Everyone knew the risks of speaking against a man like Arjun Malhotra. Arjun's lawyers countered aggressively. They claimed Rhea had been unstable, depressed, and fearful that her medical condition would be exposed. They suggested she had harmed herself in panic, and that Arjun had tried to save her too late. They painted him as a victim, a husband who had lost his wife and now faced false accusations. Every witness who supported Rhea's side was questioned relentlessly until their statements seemed uncertain. By the time the defense finished, confusion had replaced outrage. Despite the evidence, the case began to crumble under the weight of money and manipulation. Key witnesses disappeared. One officer handling the investigation resigned suddenly, and the medical report was declared inconclusive due to alleged tampering. The trial dragged on for months until the day the verdict was announced. The judge declared Arjun not guilty, citing a lack of clear evidence. The courtroom erupted in disbelief. Rhea's parents cried silently as Arjun walked out, expressionless but victorious, into a swarm of flashing cameras. For the world, it seemed another powerful man had escaped justice. But truth has a way of resurfacing. 2 years later, a young investigative journalist named Nisha Dutt released a documentary exposing hidden details of the case. In her research, she had discovered an audio recording from Arjun's private phone, leaked by one of his former security staff. In the recording, Arjun's voice could be heard boasting drunkenly to a friend, saying he had taught her a lesson for lying. The audio spread across social media within hours, sparking a nationwide uproar. People demanded the case be reopened, but Arjun had already fled abroad, reportedly living in London under a different name. Rhea's story became more than a case. It became a symbol. Activists held marches demanding stricter laws to protect women from domestic violence and medical discrimination. Her parents established a foundation in her name to help women living with HIV, turning their pain into a cause that could save others. The Malhotra mansion remained empty, its windows shuttered, a silent reminder of what had happened behind those walls. And though the man who killed her still lived freely, the world never forgot the bride who died for a secret she was too afraid to tell.